Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Carolyn Rivera, and I am here to take you through this online training event, Pearson's GCSE Physical Education, Preparing for the Summer Exams. This 2-hour live event will include 3 sections. The first, summarising the structure of components 1 and 2 for the from the summer 2023 examinations. In the second section, we will look at a range of question types from both paper 1 and 2 and look at how candidates excelled. And in the last section, you will get the opportunity to ask questions that any questions that you may have about the upcoming examination series. In this session, we will gain a better understanding on how to prepare for the summer examinations. We will look at examples of best responses, providing tips to success. We will focus on the extended responses, providing guidance on how best to approach this type of question. And finally, we will discuss further support that is available. Now, before we begin our session, let's find out a little more about the group who are listening this afternoon. Please complete the polls on this slide to allow us to get to know who is attending before we begin, and then answer the following 2 questions in the chat window. What are the key reasons for attending the session today? You should be able to see these questions on screen, by the way. And what is the single most important thing you hope to take away from the session? So if you could answer the polls now, after Jaira has put them up on screen for you, that would be great. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks for responding to the polls and for putting your reasons for attending today's session in the chat box. It's much appreciated. This is an interactive course, by the way, this afternoon, and it does help as we go along if you could interact as much as possible, because then we can support you more, and I'm sure you will get more from the training event. We've got a good mixture of people attending this afternoon, which is great. We've got some who are new to the course, as well as some more experienced teachers who are already delivering the course. Varying results about learner achievement from the last examinations, and some who are new to teaching the exams this year, which is good. This is done, by the way, as just an aside, to make sure that you are on the right course and you're not here to listen to GCSE biology. You are here to do the GCSE P course, so and for components 1 and 2. So that's reassuring for me to know I've got the right audience listening to me this afternoon, because I know very little about biology. Right, so Jairo, thank you. Can we remove the polls now, or shall I end the polls? Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Done it. Super. Okay. Right. Everything that you've put in the chat box, by the way, we should be covering this afternoon. Understanding the course, the content of the course, the structure of the course, and we're going to go through the assessment objectives as well. So hope you'll have a clearer understanding of those. Okay, so let's move on. So we will now summarise the requirements of components 1 and 2, outlining the changes to the 2 theory papers that were made for first sitting in the summer 2023. Reviewing the question types and structure of the papers. It is very important to note that there have not been any changes to the content. The changes are most structural and were made for first assessment in 2023. Each paper is now split up into 3 sections, A, B and C, with each section focusing on a particular topic from the specification. Each paper has had a 10-mark reduction, with 1 assessment objective 1 mark and 1 9-mark question having been removed. Only paper 1 has had a reduction in time, meaning it now lasts for 1 hour and 30 minutes. It is also important to note that the only command word that will be used for each of the 9-mark extended questions will be evaluate across both papers 1 and 2. Summary of the changes for both components 1 and 2 is shown on this slide. It shows the theoretical content for sections A, B and C for both components and details the total marks, the duration of each examination paper, and the percentage each component contributes towards the overall grade. So I'll give you a quick minute to have a look at that. Oops, sorry. I'm moving on a bit too fast here. Okay, so let's move on and discuss the structure of the papers. So both examination papers will have multiple choice questions, short answer questions and longer answer questions, but the number of each question type will vary between the exam papers. The multiple choice questions will have 4 options, and the candidate has to select the correct option. These question types tend to focus on recall of knowledge, which is testing assessment objective 1. Although they can also assess the application of knowledge, for example, being asked to select, for example, the most appropriate training method for a particular sports person, which is testing assessment objective 2, application of knowledge. There are also short answer questions which require 1-word answers, such as labelling a component of the heart or muscle, or a muscle, for example. And the command words associated with these types of questions tend to be state, label, identify, predict, or complete. Then we have the longer answer questions, and these will use different command words such as describe, explain, examine, analyse, and these will be worth more marks. The image on this slide shows the breakdown of marks for both theoretical components, detailing the differences between component 1 and component 2. It is important to note that the 6-mark questions will be scaffolded to help learners access marks. So, for example, in a 2 times 3 mark format or a 3 times 2 mark format, these 6-mark questions will not ever be in the form of continuous prose. Examples of the first 3 question types, the multiple choice questions or MCQs, Short answer and longer answer questions are shown on this slide from both components 1 and 2. Finally, the final question type is the extended answer response. These are the essay questions where the candidate's quality of written response is considered rather than simply how many correct statements are made, more about which we will talk about a little bit later. These questions assess all three assessment objectives: knowledge, which is assessment objective 1, application, which is assessment objective 2, and the ability to evaluate, which is assessment objective 3. There is now only one extended response question on each paper, each being worth 9 marks, with a maximum of 3 marks for each of the assessment objectives. This slide shows the extended answer questions from the 2023 examinations and from both paper 1 and paper 2. Exam questions are assessed in 2 ways. Firstly, using a points-based mark scheme, which rewards every appropriate point with a mark, such as on the multiple choice questions, the short answer questions, and the long answer questions. And then secondly, there's the level-based mark schemes, which also reward correct content, but which also consider the quality of the response in terms of how the knowledge is used in the response and applied to give logical, reasoned arguments to justify the points being made. Extended responses are assessed through levels-based mark schemes. So we use 2 types of mark schemes. It's the points-based mark scheme and then the levels-based mark scheme. And the levels-based mark scheme is only used for the extended answer responses. That's the 9 mark questions. We will now have a look at a range of question types, providing guidance on how best to approach them using suitable examples from the 2023 exam series. The first question type we will have a look at will be the multiple choice questions. If you could now complete the poll regarding the use of multiple choice questions within your own lessons. So Jaira, if you could put poll 4 on screen now for the delegates to respond to, please. Thank you. So this poll is asking how you use multiple choice questions within your lessons at the present moment in time. Okay, so we have a range of responses here with a mixture of ways in which you use the MCQs. So we've got quite a few people using them as a starter, and then we have some people use them as a plenary. Some use them for homework, some use them as a revision guide, and some of you use them in other ways, which we'll probably get to discuss a bit later on. So all of these options stated in this poll are useful ways of reinforcing recall of knowledge. And thank you for responding to that poll. Examples of multiple choice questions from both paper 1 and 2. These question types can assess both assessment objective 1, AO1, and assessment objective 2. They can be a straightforward question like the one shown on the right-hand side of the slide, the left as we're looking at it, or one that requires candidates to use information within an image like the one from the 2022 paper, the paper 1 exam. Get my teeth in a minute. So you've got the straightforward cross boxes on the right-hand side of the screen, left as we're looking at it. And then you have more of an AO2 type question where analysis of knowledge is required. So to help your learners maximise their marks from the multiple choice questions, then you need to ensure that they take their time to read the question carefully rather than rush through them because of the tick box nature of the questions, which often happens. We've also got to allow candidates, we've got to encourage candidates to underline keywords, excuse me, within the question to focus in on what the question is asking of them. And then we need to ensure that candidates only put a cross in one of the boxes. If they change their mind, you need to make sure that they know that they put a line through the cross on the original answer, and don't leave their options open and leave a cross next to every possible response. Also, you can use multiple choice questions as a starter or plenary within all of your lessons to ensure students are familiar with these types of questions. This is also a good way to check your learners' basic recall of knowledge, and I know some of you already do that. Also, you can make up your own MCQ booklets, by the way, as well as use past paper MCQs, which are accessible on the Pearson Edexcel Exam Wizard website. So now we are going to have a closer look at some of the shorter answer questions from both components 1 and 2 and how to best approach those. This short answer question was taken from the 2023 exam paper 1 and asked candidates to state the meaning of the first aid term rice. Now, using your resources, consult your mark scheme and decide whether this response is worth 1 mark or not. And then answer in the chat box, if you would, if you think that this response should be credited with 1 mark or not by answering yes or no. Okay, once again, thank you for your response. We will see here that the candidate correctly states all of the aspects of the RICE acronym, gaining 1 mark. So all of those, which all of you actually, who said that that response was worth 1 mark, so well done. This slide shows an example of a short answer question from the 2023 exam paper 2, which is question 12A. The command word used is define, because remember that this is a short answer question now, and ask candidates to define the term sportsmanship. Once again, please consult the mark scheme. It's for paper 2 this time, and decide whether the response is worth 1 mark or not. And I'll leave this on screen. Again, if you would put your answer in the chat box, that would be brilliant. So this is paper 2, 2023, question 12A. You use your mark scheme to decide whether this actual question, define sportsmanship, is worth 1 mark or not. Well done, everybody. You're all right again. So the candidate correctly defines the term sportsmanship by stating abide by the rules. I'll just put that up. To abide by the rules, that's where they got the mark from, on the slide at the moment. So whatever else that follows, whether it's right or wrong, they got that mark for stating to abide by the rules. So let's now summarise how candidates achieve most marks on the short answer questions. When candidates performed well, questions were read carefully and underlining of keywords and phrases was used correctly. Responses already provided in the question were not repeated, and the question context was used to arrive at the correct answer. Candidates also used appropriate terminology to reinforce their understanding and included sporting examples where relevant. To see further analysis of the short answer questions, please see the 2023 Principal Examiner reports for both papers 1 and 2. And I'm going to show you an example of an examiner's report, because I think not enough people, from my experience when answering questions to centres and teacher assessors, you don't realise that there's a lot of information in the examiner reports which follows each examination series. So I might get this completely wrong, hopefully not. So I'm going to try and stop sharing this screen. Whoops. And I'm going to try and share an examiner. So there we are. Hopefully you can see that on screen now. But that's an example from an examiner's report for question 12A, which we've just answered, where the candidate was asked to define the term sportsmanship. And you'll see different examples of the question given, that were given by candidates, and where they gained a mark and where they didn't gain a mark, and why they gained a mark and why they didn't gain a mark. And I find that really useful because it does kind of help to promote your understanding of how the questions on the exam papers are answered. So if you know you're ever in doubt about a certain question on an examination paper, please refer to the examiner's reports for each of the papers, and you'll see something like that. And you'll also be guided towards finding out further information. So hopefully you can refer that to that. Okay, so now I'll go stop sharing that one now. But it was, I thought it was really quite important to let you see that. Oops, there we are. So we've now just had a look at the summary of how candidates achieve most marks on the short answer questions. So we'll move on. Hopefully you can see that screen. So we'll now have a look at a closer look at some of the longer answer questions from both components 1 and 2, and examine how best to approach them. The longer answer questions across both components 1 and 2 are still marked using a points-based mark scheme. The typical command words used within these question types are describe and explain. The candidate's responses need to be linked back to the context of the question and show some form of development throughout the response. If a series of isolated points was made, this would just be state. So the points have to be linked. This slide shows an example of a longer answer question from paper 2, question 10B. The command word used is explain, and ask candidates to explain 2 reasons why a person's disability may affect their participation in sport and physical activity. So if you would turn to your mark scheme for paper 2 and look at it and see and record how many marks this response should be credited with, and please put your answer in the chat window. Okay, thanks for giving it a go. Everybody who can see the resources and has access to them. I'm sure we can sort that out if you can't access the resources, Marie there. So this candidate gains 4 out of the 4 marks, which most of you have awarded. Let's see the breakdown in the marks. So the candidate gains the first marking point in the first part by stating that there might be a limited number of teams in their area for 1 mark, and then goes on to say this might limit access for the second marking point. Hopefully you all got that one. And then in the second part of the question, the candidate gains a mark for stating that the equipment might be expensive, which might affect their participation in sport and physical activity. And then they gain the fourth marking point for stating that the equipment will be expensive if it has to be changed, especially for people with a disability. So they're developing their response, which gains a mark for adapted equipment from the mark scheme. So all in all, that candidate got 4 out of 4. Hopefully you can see that. As I'm tipping around the screen there. Apologies for that. So this slide gives an example of a longer answer question from the 2023 paper 1. It's question 6.ei and asks candidates to explain the importance of white blood cells when training for a long distance event. Again, using the mark scheme in your pack, how many marks would you reckon that this response is worth? Putting, again, your answer in the chat box. Okay, so the majority of you have awarded 2 marks here. So let's have a look at the breakdown in the marks. So in this response, the candidate gains 2 out of the possible 3 marks. So those of you who awarded 2 marks, well done. The first mark is awarded for fighting off infection, and the second for staying healthy. The candidate would have needed to include in their response comments relating to the fact that this would allow Amory to continue to train or avoid reversibility to gain the 3rd mark. So the explain, remember that's a developed response that's expected from the question. It's worth 3 marks. So they're saying what the purpose of a white blood cell is, fights off infection, and then what the benefit of it is, remains healthy, to stay healthy, and explain the importance. So it's a for and against reason. So the fact that they did not state the importance to training in a negative way, that it would avoid reversibility, and it would stop them from training if they couldn't fight off the infection, obviously. So that stops them from getting that 3rd mark. So it was 2 there. So again, this slide shows an example of a longer answer question from the 2023 paper 1. Question 10A. Can you see the kind of the variety of questions? The command word used is justify, and ask candidates to justify using the data in table 3 why part 2 of the training session was the most demanding for Karen. So if you read through the question and have a look at the mark scheme to decide how many marks this response is worth, putting your answer in the chat window. Change of mind there, Nikki. So thank you, everybody, for your participation with this once again. So the majority of you there are correct in that this response the candidate actually gains all 3 marks that are available. The first mark was awarded for stating it took Karen 10 minutes longer. The second for stating that the terrain was hilly. And the third mark was awarded for stating that it was the same distance as the other 2 parts of the race. So that's how the marks were awarded for that. And hopefully you can see that in the mark scheme. So well done. Right, moving on. This slide summarises what candidates did well and what they didn't do so well on the longer answer questions. The required knowledge was recalled and applied correctly to the context provided in the question. Ideas were expressed clearly with appropriate examples where required. Understanding and higher order thinking skills were demonstrated by clearly developing ideas, following through points in depth. The candidates that didn't do so well on these questions sometimes did not use the correct question context. They found it difficult to develop their response and lacked application or the required analysis and evaluation. Once again, for further insight into how the question was marked, please consult the Principal Examiner reports for both Paper 1 and 2, which will provide further insight into all the longer answer questions. Both examiner reports from the 2023 exam series can be found within your pack of supporting documents, so hopefully you'll be able to access those. So, what are the main issues your students face when answering these questions? If you could please type in some answers in the chat to allow us to share as a group. So I'll give you a few minutes to kind of state what are the main issues your students face when answering these kind of questions, the long answer questions. Thank you for putting your thoughts into the chat box there. And most of the points that you've raised there, and I'll share some of them in a second, are exactly what we've been addressing up to this point, about students rambling or waffling and not using the correct terminology. Again, the application to or giving us a relevant sporting example, rather than or not giving a relevant sporting example and giving a generic general answer. Sport, showing enough knowledge and then application. It's the application of knowledge. They have the knowledge, but then they can't apply it. That's quite common. And then find it difficult to expand their answers, developing their answers from the original point. Lots of repetition, applying the knowledge to the context of the question, and again, linking it back to the sport or activity. Yep, agreed here. They don't access all marks, only giving a certain number of points. So yes, although it's a points-based mark scheme, and they will get credited with the points that they make, depending on the command word and depending on the number of assessment object or the assessment objectives that are in the question that are being tested, those skills that are being tested in the question, then they're never going to achieve maximum marks if they can't show knowledge and understanding, and then application of knowledge and understanding. So it defeats the object. It was quite interesting, actually, because I think when I delivered this course earlier on, one of the delegates mentioned that they had a whole school approach to answering examination questions, because obviously examination papers tend to use a similar structure, with multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and the longer answer questions. And there was a whole school approach to answering examination questions, which I thought was quite useful. So it might be something that you might take back to your school and share with other departments when answering questions, because I think it's familiarity, isn't it, really? So that might be worth something to think about. No, for the longer answer questions, Bill, it's no good putting bullet points because you need some link to the response. Yep. And Chris has just made a really valid point here that he uses, and I can never remember these acronyms. I really need to make a note of them. He uses PEB, make the point, expand the point, and say what the benefit or the effect on the performance is. And that's a good acronym. I know quite a few of you will probably use different acronyms, and I've heard of several, but they all amount to a similar thing. Make the point, expand the point, or explain, and then say what the benefit is. And that's a good way of delivering these longer answer questions. So thank you again for that. So let's move on. And you're welcome, Rosalind. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. So let's now move on and have a closer look at some of the extended answer questions from both components 1 and 2 and how best to approach them. So I'm going to ask Jaira to put up a few polls now. I'd like you to complete the polls, and these are with regards to the extended answer questions and how your students perform with these types of questions on the examination paper. So if you could answer those polls now, or those questions on the polls, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so looking at your response there to the polls, so the average mark your students will be getting probably within the 5, 6 middle range, the mark band there out of the 9, with some getting 7. And again, where do your students struggle to gain marks? It's making those developed points and using sporting examples. So that's kind of linked to the longer answer question issues that have just been raised. And I'm sure that the majority of you do, which you do, use a structure plan that is taught to students to help them answer your extended answer questions. So let's see now then how we can help you to improve those scores and get them to answer the extended answer questions better. Once again, thank you for your interaction and answering the poll questions. So the extended answer questions are worth, as you will know, 9 marks. And as stated earlier, there is now one of this type of question on each paper. Unlike the other questions on the papers, these questions are marked using a levels-based mark scheme. 3 marks are available for each of the assessment objectives. As a reminder, that is AO1, recall of knowledge, AO2, the application of knowledge, and AO3, evaluation. Candidates need to demonstrate the development of their response like the longer answer questions. And for this presentation, we will consider some extended answer questions from each paper. So here are both the extended answer questions from both paper 1 and paper 2, taken from the 2023 examinations. So on paper 1, the question was, Tom's football team is playing in the regional finals in 3 weeks. It is important that the team continues to play and train, but remains injury-free. The question is, evaluate 3 different ways, apart from warming up, the team can reduce the risk of injury so the team can play in the final. And then paper 2, the question was, evaluate the appropriateness of both massed and distributed practice for a beginner such as Petra. I know you can read those yourselves, but sometimes when somebody reads it out, it sounds different. So this was question 13 from paper 1, which asked candidates to evaluate 3 different ways, apart from warming up, the team can reduce the risk of injury so the team can play in the final. So please view this candidate's response moving from left to right and consult your mark scheme within your pack, keeping a track of where you awarded the assessment objectives 1 to 3, and mark accordingly. You're marking out of 9 marks. So see how many marks you think that this response should be awarded or was awarded. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. So look at your mark scheme from paper 1, question 13, and see how many marks you think this question should be awarded, putting your marks in the chat window if you would. Thank you. Okay, thank you once again for taking the time to mark this response. So this is an example of a level 3 response, and it was credited with 7 marks. And the majority of you were there and thereabouts with your marking. So well done again. Each mark has been highlighted throughout this slide. The first paragraph relating to cool down is credited with 3 marks for each of the 3 assessment objectives. The AO1 is awarded for stating cool down, the AO2 for linking this with removal of lactic acid. The AO3 has been awarded for concluding that this will reduce the risk of muscle soreness. There is a further AO2 credit for reducing blood pooling, but there is no further credit in this paragraph due to a repeated point regarding stiffness soreness. Moving down to the second paragraph, this contains 2 assessment objective 1s statements and 2 AO2 statements. AO1 marks were awarded for checking of equipment and making sure they are wearing the right clothing. The 2 AO2 statements were awarded for the 2 linked examples of protective equipment, that's shin pads and boots. And please note that an AO3 statement was not awarded for protecting the tibia, as the candidate must be specific, stating a certain type of injury, for example, stopping a fracture. The third paragraph gains an AO1 and an AO2 statement for stating hydration, and so they don't run the risk of overheating. No further credit was awarded as there were no specific injuries mentioned when talking about lack of concentration towards the end of the response. It is important to note that although the candidate has made 10 statements, there is only 1 AO3 statement, and AO1 and AO2 statements are maxed out after 3. So you should remember that that is the most that can be achieved for each of the AOs using a levels-based mark scheme. So 3 marks for AO1 maximum 3 marks for AO2, and maximum of marks of 3 for AO3 statements. So this candidate here has maxed out on their AO1 and AO2 statements, so no further marks can be awarded for those statements, and there is only the 1 AO3 statement. So that's how this response has been marked using a levels-based mark scheme. So that amounts to a total of 7 out of 9 marks. This is question 13 from paper 2, and asks the candidates to evaluate the appropriateness of both massed and distributed practice for a beginner such as Petra. So again, please view the candidate response, reading from left to right on the screen, consult the mark scheme within your pack, keep a track of where you awarded the AO1 to 3 marks, or statements and enter your mark in the chat window. Again, I'll give you a couple of minutes to do this. Thank you. Roslyn, thanks for your question. If I can come back to that, because we will go over this again. If I don't answer that clearly for you when I go through the breakdown in marks and how they're achieved, I'll go back to that and see if I can answer your question more specifically. But hopefully I'm going to cover that. And excellent, thank you. Okay, brilliant. So let's see how many marks, how this response was awarded. Again, you're all in the range here. So this is an example of a level 2 response credited with 6 marks. Each mark has been highlighted throughout the slide. The first paragraph relating to massed practice contains all 3 AOs. AO1 is credited for little or no breaks, with AO2 being awarded for repetitive practice, allowing the skill to be perfected, and the AO3 is awarded for the fact that mass practice could increase fatigue. So that's a really nicely developed paragraph there, which gains 1 mark for each of the assessment objectives, of the 3 assessment objectives. The second paragraph relating to distributed practice contains an AO1 and an AO3 for breaks in between and the fact that this may impact on the skill being perfected. No mark has been awarded for an AO2 in this paragraph, as the candidate did include fatigue, but this was a repeated point of the AO2 statement in the paragraph before, in the first paragraph. The final paragraph contains 1 AO1 statement for stating that distributed is probably better for a beginner. And that's just an AO1 as it's not an evaluation. So this response contains 3 AO1s, and that's the maximum amount of marks that can be credited for the AO1 response in any extended answer 9-mark question. 1 AO2 and 2 AO3s, giving a total of 6 marks out of 9. So well done to those of you who were spot on with the 6 marks, but you know, you're there and thereabouts. This is another example of a response from question 13, paper 2, 2023 exam. Again, if you could view the candidate response, consult the mark scheme within your pack, keep a track of where you awarded the AOs, so you're getting used to awarding the maximum amount of 3, and record your mark in the chat window. Okay, so well done. You'd all do well on GCSE PE exam, papers 1 and 2, so well done. A couple of you a little bit generous on this one, and let's see how the marks have been. So Daisy. Okay, so back to the slide. So this is an example of a level 1 response, and it was credited with 3 marks, not 4 marks, which some of you did award. Each mark has been highlighted throughout this slide. The first paragraph gains an AO1 and an AO2 for inferring that mass practice has no rests, and for linking this to helping the skill to be mastered as there is more time to focus on one skill. The second paragraph gains 1 AO1 for stating that distributed practice involves little breaks, lots of little breaks. So this response contains 2 AO1s and 1 AO2, giving a total of 3 marks out of 9 marks. And again, like the other questions, to see further analysis of the extended answer questions, please see the Principal Examiner reports from the 2023 examination series for both papers 1 and 2. You will also find on the website the examiner reports from all of the 4 components for the 2024 examination series as well. So you'll gain further insight. Okay, so the best approach for candidates when answering the extended answer questions is to always write in full sentences and never use bullet points, because that doesn't show development, it just shows statements. The better responses always show a plan at the beginning and underline key terms, helping them to clarify their answer before beginning. It is also essential to ensure that statements progress through the assessment objectives from 1 to 3 if they are to produce fully developed statements, allowing them to access into the upper levels of the mark scheme. The use of relevant sport examples should be included throughout the answer to help them to maximise their marks, as we've probably already identified. This slide shows a good approach to an extended answer question. This example is related to paper 2, question 13 from the 2023 examination. The highest scoring candidates follow this pattern by writing paragraphs that progress through the assessment objectives, demonstrating the full understanding of the question. As in this example, a good approach to the extended answer questions is for students to write a developed paragraph about each point they want to make and build on each of the 3 AOs. For example, demonstrate knowledge, then apply that knowledge, perhaps using an example, and then refer to the impact on performance, giving more depth and detail. An example of a developed response is on this slide, and it gains credit for each of the assessment objectives. So maths practice is repeated practice without any breaks, AO1, allowing players more time to focus on developing their skills, AO2, allowing the skill of a forehand or any other skill to be learnt quicker and have better consistency, AO3. Getting students to write after each statement whether they think it is an AO1 point or an AO2 point or an AO3 point is a good way to improve their knowledge on how to answer this type of question, whilst also providing valuable information to you as the teacher to inform future planning. It would be appropriate at this point for everyone to share any revision ideas that are used within your classes and that have worked and have been successful. The ideas do not have to be things that you have tried with the GCSE PE class. If you are new to teaching this course, these ideas will help improve all our learners achieve more. A couple of ideas are listed on the slide as a start, although for sure there will be so many ideas amongst delegates that could help everyone, and especially the learners. Most of the ideas here are self-explanatory, and we have touched on some of these ideas in this presentation already. Although just to explain the first activity on this slide, which is called Recall 9. Now, Recall 9 is a very simple way to increase recall and retention of basic knowledge. You can use it as a starter or plenary, where you ask students a set number of basic questions. The first group of questions is from the last lesson, the second group from a couple of weeks ago, and the last group of questions is from over a month ago. These questions can be repeated over several lessons are just a few questions changed each week to build student confidence and increase retention. So you'll see other ideas there on the screen. And obviously this presentation is available to you in your pack, so you can use it and take it away. But if there are other ideas that you have, then please share them with us now in the chat window. And Chris, yes, absolutely. I was just going to mention the acronyms. The PEB, the make the point, explain the point, and say what the benefit of the point, can also be used for the 9-mark questions as well. Especially easy when used on questions that have 3 elements that need addressing. On an example of the last question where there are 2, complete another PEB for one of the 2 areas and always write a concluding paragraph. That's absolutely excellent practice. Thank you for sharing that. And then we've got an example here of revision bingo. Create bingo cards with questions, play against the person next to you. Perfect. I think it is a good idea to get your students to mark their own responses as well and get them to identify so they can get a better understanding of how you mark using the assessment objectives. Because it's that development that they lack, isn't it? I think the majority of them are absolutely fine recalling knowledge. It's applying that knowledge and giving an example. If they get into that kind of habit of writing their responses, then they will be able to maximize their opportunity to gain more marks. So hopefully you can use these examples that are on the screen and others that have been mentioned. So thank you again for that. So now let's move on to section 3. This is where you will have the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have to help you to prepare your students for the summer examinations this year. Please feel free to ask any questions that you need to clarify anything that has not already been included in this afternoon's presentation. So please feel free to ask any questions. I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask anything that hasn't been addressed so far in this presentation. Marie, great example here. We're still on the examples here. You've got some questions for me as well. So we've got a couple of examples here, which I'll go through. Connect 4, answer a question, and you get to put the token in. And is that tic-tac-toe? Brilliant. And then we've got mastermind, divide the class into quizmaster and contestants. Oh, that's a bit challenging to be in the hot seat, but thank you for that. Okay, so as well as your ideas, keep them coming and I'll try and pick them up. Is there ever any negative marking? That's a good, really good question, Susan. No, examiners are always instructed to look for the marks. You read every question, every response, and we mark. We're instructed and we're trained to mark positively. So anywhere that you can see any link to the question, the response is linked to the question, then you award a mark. I'm not sure if I've got it on my screen here. I'll have a see if I can. The instructions on, if you can see the mark scheme, you'll see at the very beginning that examiners are told to award all marks. And we include this sounds horrible when I say this, but it's a generalisation. If you see a candidate who perhaps hasn't can't spell absolutely 100% correctly, as long as you can read the response and it sounds like the word that it should be, then we award the marks. And we try and look for the mark. So if we see a correct mark, but then, as I said before, there are incorrect statements, that doesn't matter. You award a mark for a correct mark. So we mark positively, not negatively. You look for the marks always. I've got some more ideas here coming up. Chris, important definition, dominoes. Question and an answer on a card. The answer you have is the answer to someone else's question. Students listen to the question and shout their answer. Done over many weeks, it helps to memorise the definitions and also develop automaticity of answers. Yep, I can see that. Can be done as a plenary or a starter. Write keywords on Jenga blocks. When a block is pulled, 1, define 2, explain 3, apply to a situation. Perfect. And don't forget to have a bank of videos, which I'm sure you already have, or you use YouTube to have that bank of sporting examples, which is really important, because I think that is definitely a downfall with lots of students. I think them being able to apply to sporting situations, and yet sport is on television so much these days, so there's no excuse for them not to watch sport other than the usual reasons. But if you have, kind of sporting examples as you're teaching a topic, have them so you can pull them up and use them as examples there. We've also got catchphrase style game. Guess the sports star. Answer a question to reveal a square. Oh, that's a good idea. Person who gets the correct sports person gets a prize. People picked at random and create the questions. Excellent. Okay, so keep your questions coming and your ideas. Another good one there, Bill. Random name generator. Replace names with questions. Excellent ideas. Okay, so let's move on. We can always come back to these. So this slide here, it contains 2 very useful links. The first being the Pearson PE website, containing all the information you need from the specification. And I'm going to kind of emphasize the specification, particularly to those of you who are new to teaching the course. This should be the first point of reference when teaching the content for this qualification. And that's before referring to any of the textbooks that are available. So please go to the specification, see the content that needs to be taught for both the 2 theory components, the practical performance component, and the personal exercise component. So as well, on the website, you'll see sample assessments, exam materials, examiner reports, forms and administration, and lots of teaching and learning materials. It is also the place where you can keep up to date with any course changes. So this is the website. The second link is to the Pearson Exam Wizard, which really is a fantastic tool to help prepare your learners for their future examinations. As the image shows, you can look at all the recent papers, build your own paper focusing in on a certain topic area, which can then be saved on Exam Wizard for future use or exported to Microsoft Word. This really does speed up the designing of tests to check learner progress. It also allows mark scheme and principal examiner reports to be attached to your chosen questions. So you can keep a bank of questions related to topic areas using examiner reports. So you're looking at best practice, how to award marks, why marks aren't awarded, why marks are awarded, and the associated mark schemes all in one place. So that's a really good resource, the Exam Wizard. Not sure whether you've seen this already, but from January this year, the Pearson Edexcel qualification page for GCSE PE saw the addition of a new exemplar library, which can be found in the top blue ribbon, see right on the screen there, for component 3, that's the practical performance component. And you'll find here lots of video examples of team games, racket sports, artistic sports, outdoor sports, individual sports and athletics. And they're headed into team activity and individual activity, then subheaded into the team games, racket sports, etc. And also you'll find an exemplar library with a bank of resources for component 4. That's the personal exercise program component, covering a wide range of sports and activities and covering levels 0 to 5. These libraries will be expanded regularly to include each year's standardisation materials, improved examples of evidence, and newly sourced materials to fill any gaps. So that's kind of a work in progress where you'll constantly see additions onto that exemplar library, and that's for the 2 practical components. Further useful links can be found on this slide, pertaining to guidance documents and information about the Learner Work Transfer Portal and the forms and administration documents. So you should be able to click onto these links and access anything that you need that will help you with your preparation in all of the components for Pearson GCSE qualification. For any additional support, the PE subject advisor, Penny Lewis, can be contacted using the details on this slide. So if you can't think of any questions that you want to ask about any of the 4 components for GCSE physical education, then please contact Penny and she will provide an answer to your question at any point. To find out more about the excellent number of courses that Pearson can offer, please visit the link on this slide that will take you to Pearson's Professional Development Academy website. This is where you'll be able to select PE and choose from a number of training courses. Following this event, you will receive an invitation to share your thoughts about the session. Your feedback is invaluable to us as it helps us tailor our professional development materials to better meet your needs. Please don't hesitate to let us know what you'd like to see more of and what areas you think could be improved. And then finally from me, unless there are any further questions, I'd like to thank you for attending and participating in this afternoon's training event. You've been really great and I do appreciate your interaction through the polls and the chat window. I hope that you found it informative and helpful so that you can prepare your learners for their examinations in the summer with confidence. So thank you once again. I'll stick around for as long as I need to, not past 6 o'clock though, to answer any further questions that you might have. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your evening and thank you very much.